Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's part three of today's mini webinar series. My name is Lorenzo Sibilia. I'm one of the account managers here on the Give Effect Client Success team. Really excited to be connecting with all of your teams here today to review just some general fundamentals regarding volunteer management and putting together a successful volunteer management strategy. So I'll get started in a few moments here. I'll give folks a few more moments to trickle in, but while we have a second, if folks want to start to just list where they're calling in from in the chat, right? I know we should be expecting folks from all over the country and possibly even Canada today. So feel free, go ahead, pop where you're from in the chat if you'd like, just to start us off, right? I'm in upstate New York, currently in Utica, New York, right in the smack dab middle of the state. About 4 hours north of New York City and about 3 hours east of Buffalo. New Jersey, awesome. Few Jersey folks in the house, excuse me. Patrick, nice to see you here. Patrick is one of my clients. Utah, Washington, got some folks over from the west, over in the mountains. Some more east folks. Love it. I love it. Excellent. Super happy to have all of you folks here. That's definitely one of the most favorite elements of my job is getting to interact with folks from all over the country, right? One of the perks of remote work. So super thrilled to have you all here with us today. I'll give folks 1 or 2 more minutes to trickle in still. But thank you again. Excellent. So with that, because we only have a half hour, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in and get us started. So thank you all again for joining us. This is part 3 of technically 4 for our 2024 Kickstart, Kickstart Your 2024 4-part webinar series. So of course, right, we had previously held the first 2 installments of this webinar series on January 17th, January 31st, primarily covering donation and donation management, right? Fundraising strategies, different items that your team can utilize in that regard. Today's webinar is going to be focusing primarily, right, switching gears a little bit into volunteer management, right? So specifically, we will be reviewing how to build a winning volunteer management strategy, right? Whether this be using technology, right, through use of technology, whether it be Give Effect, right, Volunteer Hub, right, whatever your volunteer management platform is, and then of course taking a deeper dive, or not speaking more holistically, right, just regarding what some best practices are, both that I've seen and just generally, right, what methods folks are utilizing within the sector. So as far as today's agenda items go, we'll be starting as always, right, with welcome and introductions. I'll provide a brief overview, of Give Effect. What exactly is Give Effect? What can teams accomplish through use of Give Effect? And then review of our strategies, right? And then just to go through these one by one, personalizing your volunteer application, maintaining open and consistent communication with your volunteers, streamlining your shift management, right, your volunteer opportunity management, implementing feedback from your volunteers, and of course, evaluating or giving folks the ability to evaluate your volunteer system. And then, of course, converting volunteers into donors, right, so that they could further help keep the lights on. And then we'll have a brief Q&A session at the end, okay? So my name is Lorenzo Sibilia, right? If you've joined us for either of the first 2 installments of this 4-part webinar series, I am a member of our client success team. I am an account manager on our client success team. Prior to coming to Give Effect, I served as an AmeriCorps Vista Fellow in Albany, New York, with the Boys and Girls Clubs of the capital area. And then, of course, right, in my role as an account manager with Give Effect, I've worked with hundreds of nonprofits to help them leverage their technology, but also to help them strategize, right, speaking completely regardless of technological use. So strategy, uses for technology, right? Those are my wheelhouses. So what is Give Effect? And I will note part 4 of this webinar series will be held on February 28th, 2 weeks from today. So while today's session will primarily be focused on just broadly speaking, how to build a winning volunteer strategy, we will talk a little bit on how these strategies may manifest within Give Effect. But if you're completely new to Give Effect, maybe you're a potential client, right? You haven't yet purchased a subscription. We will be having a group demo on Wednesday, the 28th, where we will be doing a deeper dive into Give Effect, what exactly is Give Effect, and what your teams can utilize it for. But just to give a brief skinny on Give Effect here, Give Effect is one of the only all-in-one nonprofit management softwares available within the sector. So through use of Give Effect, teams are able to host an online POS system. Of course, they're able to host a relationship database, an event management event management platform, right, as well as a fundraising event management platform, volunteer management, of course, which will be the focus of today, membership management, mass marketing, mass email communications, grant management, moves management, and also web hosting. And then, of course, the cherry on top that ties all of these pieces together are smart automation components, right? So not only is Give Effect an all-in-one store for all of this data, but the system is constantly talking to itself, updating itself, right, based on the front-facing actions being taken by your supporters, your volunteers, your donors. Okay. So speaking in the realm of volunteer management, why is it important, right, to have a strong volunteer management strategy, right, put to paper? So ultimately, admins, right, users, nonprofit professionals, right, they spend on average about 4 hours a week, right, manually managing volunteer data, whether it be right, going through the signups for this week, sending out emails, whatever the case may be, right? On average, users spend about, just generally speaking, right, folks spend about 4 hours per week managing volunteers, right, manually managing volunteers. And of course, that equates to over 200 hours per year, right, on average. So volunteers are incredibly important, right? Of course, that's informed by this next metric that we have here. 9 in 10 nonprofits, right, rely on volunteers and rely on volunteer labor, right? So that's a lot, right? Over 90% of nonprofits utilize volunteers in some capacity. And to put that, right, to flip it on its head a little bit, just under 1/5 of nonprofits do not have any paid staff. Okay, so 17% of nonprofits rely solely on volunteers to keep the lights on and to complete your mission, right? To actually do the good work that your team needs to do, right? So all that being said, volunteers incredibly important to any nonprofit organization, even the larger nonprofits, right? Of course, having volunteer labor employed, right, absolutely alleviates the amount of work that your team, right, your paid staff needs to employ, right, to keep the lights on, to run your programs, whatever the case may be. Okay, so referencing again that 17% figure, right? Just under 1/5 of all nonprofits do not employ any paid staff, right? Because of that, it's incredibly important to have a streamlined, concrete, solidified volunteer management platform or strategy in place, right? Turnover happens, right? I'm sure none of us are strangers to the turnover that occurs within this sector. All the more reason to have those reusables, right, in place so that folks have a very streamlined process, right? So one of those elements is a volunteer application, right? Being able to have a solidified volunteer application in place so that your team can very easily collect, screen, and identify new volunteers, right? And collect all the relevant information that is needed for those folks. So ultimately, when it comes to a strong volunteer application, right, what are some of the characteristics of a very strong volunteer application? So volunteer applications, right, a strong application, whether it be online or a traditional pen and paper application, right, utilizes customized forms to build detailed profiles for your volunteers, right? So of course, through your application, you're going to be collecting information for your volunteers that's going to be usable down the line, right? Whether you want to segment all of your volunteers based off certain data they provided through the application, right? So ultimately, a strong application will utilize customized forms or questions, right? Also, a good application will ask the essentials and leave room for unique interests, right? So it's great that we're collecting all of this required information, right? Maybe we need emergency contact information. We need this volunteer's address, but we also want to know what they're interested in, right? Why are they volunteering with us in the first place? Are they connected with our mission? Are they maybe someone they know had benefited from our organization services? So it's important not only to collect essentials, but also to gauge interests, right? And in order to build that personalization within your database. Of course, having all of this information on hand makes opportunity matching easier, right? Reaching out to folks that are skilled in computer science probably won't make sense if you're looking to staff your after school program, right? Unless, of course, it's a computer science centric program, right? But if it's just a general, right, maybe this person needs to watch kindergartners after school, probably wouldn't align them, right, with that specific opportunity. And then, of course, every volunteer application is going to be specific depending on your organization and the requirements for your organization. So prior to even building your application, I always recommend that teams sit down internally, right, and iron out all of the requirements and mandatory information that you will need from your volunteers in order to actually have them serve, right? So I always say it, while I can provide all the tools in the universe, right, teams, clients, organizations having that mechanism in place, right, their own internal strategy in place, makes it a lot easier for that process to manifest through technology, whether it be GiveEffect or any other volunteer management platform. So, of course, just a pro tip here, right? When possible, it's always easiest to go paperless, right? To allow your forms, application, sign-up pages, what have you, to live online. Of course, this also increases the automation that's involved in these sign-up processes. Okay, so moving on. We have an example, right, honing in on GiveEffect and GiveEffect capabilities. We have an example of a volunteer application right here. So as you could see, the first half of this information is important data, right? The information that is absolutely required by our organization, right? As you can see, we have certain address information listed up here, and of course, date of birth information, and then questions unique to our organization, right? Any recommendations, accommodations, any general information that folks may need to provide just to provide that additional contextualization information, right? So I'm going to scroll over into GiveEffect, and actually I have a version of our demo volunteer application open right here. So of course, right, we have all of our name, phone, email information. Folks are able to provide this right here. Again, we have our DOB information, just some general background info. And then as I scroll down, we have not only a section where folks can identify elements relevant to their experience, what they're skilled in, what they're interested in, what roles they're proficient in, etc. Folks are also able to identify their availability and then any custom information that we have identified down here in the bottom. To jump into the back end of GiveEffect, just to show your teams what it looks like to configure our volunteer application, right? Folks are able, GiveEffect users are able to identify a validity period for their application. If you want your application to expire, you could set that validity period. If you don't care about your application expiring, right, you're also able to configure that. Users are able to program, right, what information is required while completing your volunteer application, excuse me, and also what information may be asked from the volunteer, but also, right, isn't required. So as we could see, gender, right, in our volunteer application is asked, but we're not requiring that folks provide it, right? So we're able to skip this question if we see fit. Skills and interests, right? Here's where we're able to program our application to prod volunteers to provide any skills or interests, right? Of course, we can make these questions mandatory as well if we see fit. And then here are our custom questions, right? The questions that are completely custom within the GiveEffect demo volunteer application. So of course, every single team is going to have completely different custom questions within their application, right? Depending on your internal requirements and the information you require from your volunteers in order to have them serve. One other note about the GiveEffect volunteer application, right? it might not be that far outside of the realm of a possibility that you require volunteers to have an application on file in order to serve, right? If someone doesn't have an app on file, they can't sign up. GiveEffect does allow users to require that, right? Make that requirement. So via this closed system setting within GiveEffect, if I activate that setting, my volunteers won't be able to sign up for an opportunity unless they have that application on file, specifically that valid application. So if my application on file is expired, I'm going to have to complete a new one. All right, so that's one really neat piece of this application automation within GiveEffect. Okay, so moving on, volunteer profiles, right? Being able to collect all of that information and housing it within that universal contact record, right? Within that universal profile for the supporter, that's going to be huge, right? That's going to be key. So ultimately, right, your application is going to serve as a vehicle where information's collected, right? Shocker there, I know. But general contact information, skills, interests, roles, certifications, all of that important information, right? So ideally, all of that data would be housed in that contacts record. So we're looking at Tracy Washington here, right? If Tracy, just not speaking regarding GiveEffect, right? If Tracy were to complete our volunteer application and she already has an existing contact record, ideally, that application, once she completes it, is just going to be tied to her existing record with all of that associated information, right? So it's not like Tracy is going to have a completely new record created for her when she completes her application. If she already has that existing record, that application data is just going to be associated with her existing record. Jumping back into GiveEffect, right? What we see here is the micro view, right? This is a single volunteer, a single contact, or specifically a single contact that is also a volunteer within GiveEffect, right? Of course, all of our volunteers are also going to live in the volunteers section, right? Nothing too insane here. So here we have access to all of our volunteers. So all of our volunteers are housed within this section of the system. But remember, right, within GiveEffect, every one of these contacts is going to have one record, right? Assuming they don't have any duplicates. So with Lorenzo here, if I click into his contact record, I will be able to see not only his general contact information, I will also be able to see all of his donation information, as well as all of his volunteer information, including his application, which Lorenzo currently doesn't have one on file, right? I'll have to do my due diligence. But scrolling down within Lorenzo's record, again, we have access to all of the assignments, all of the times Lorenzo has ever served. All right, so having that contact record that contains all relevant information is going to be incredibly useful just in order to access that information via a very streamlined manner. And then what's also nice about GiveEffect, of course, is that we're able to query anything, right? Any of the available data within GiveEffect is queryable. So as an example, maybe I want all of my contacts. Actually, let me do this one instead. I want all of my contacts that have worked my 101 teaching job. I could go ahead, run this query, and from here, out of 425 volunteers, we could see that 15 volunteers have served in my 101 teaching job. All right, so within GiveEffect, we have not only the micro view, right? All of that information is going to be contained within this person's contact record. We also have the macro view. All of this information is going to be housed specifically within the volunteer section. Okay. Moving on, open and consistent communication. Okay, so the nonprofit and volunteer relationship, it's a mutual exchange, right? So even though your volunteers aren't getting paid, right, they're still getting something out of their service, right? Maybe it's just that warm, fuzzy feeling, right, of doing good in their community, doing good for your organization, right? Maybe there's certain, of course, community service, right? I'm sure none of us are strangers to community service requirements, right? Court-ordered community service. Or there's also maybe incentives. Maybe your organization has certain incentives to volunteer. One example, right, for a lot of Habitat for Humanity affiliates, maybe I need to recruit X number of volunteers and have them volunteer on my behalf to have those hours be counted towards my record as sweat equity, right? So all that's to say there's a lot of different ways in which volunteers benefit from the nonprofit volunteer relationship, even though they're not necessarily getting paid. right? So ultimately, setting a clear communication strategy internally, right, using multiple communication channels, that's going to be one way in which you could really easily but also effectively communicate with your volunteers, right? Letting them know maybe new opportunities are available, new benefits, right? Maybe volunteers get a free membership within your organization, right? If they have if they eclipse a certain amount of hours. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right? Whatever your communication strategy is, keep it consistent, right? In order to continuously reach out to folks and, of course, inform folks of new information. And, of course, sending information and responding to volunteer feedback, right? If you ever do respond to your volunteers' feedback, let them know, right? Let them know, hey, we made this change based on your feedback, right? Thank you so much for being a partner, supporting us, yada, 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 right? That in and of itself lets them feel heard, and it makes that volunteer more likely to interact and serve with your organization, maybe even become a potential donor down the line, right? Which we'll get to in a second. So just some general strategies here, right? Of course, tailoring your communications based on the volunteer opportunities that specific volunteer has served, right? To stick with my computer science and kindergarten, babysitting example, right? It probably doesn't make sense to reach out to our kindergarten, right? Our kindergarten after school babysitters regarding computer science specific opportunities, right? So being able to segment our communications based on which volunteer did what. And then also utilize text message marketing, right? Text messages, right? SMS text messages have a nearly 100% open rate, right? Which is ridiculous if you really think about it. Which emails have a 100% open rate, right? So text messaging, also feel free to utilize text message vendors, right? In order to just, again, right, diversify the channels, the communication channels in which you're communicating with your volunteers. So moving on, right? Shift management, some best practices for shift management. As a volunteer manager, right? And I say this from experience, I did used to actually, when I was in AmeriCorps Vista, I did serve as a volunteer manager, funnily enough. But as a volunteer manager, right, it's incredibly important to maintain an active role, right, within your shifts, within your opportunities, before, during, and after the volunteer's opportunity, right? Before, during, and after that given shift. So before, right, being able to use a volunteer calendar to identify which of your opportunities still need signups, which of your opportunities, right, are maxed out, right, can't collect any more signups. Maybe you're, the floater volunteer for that day. Maybe you need to identify where you need to actually float, right, where you actually need to be. A volunteer calendar, being able to break out shift occupancy, right, would be incredibly useful for that work, for that option, right? During, mobile check-in, right? Generally speaking, right, being able to track when folks begin their shift and when they end their shift is going to be incredibly crucial, so that you know who actually, right, served for when they signed up, who actually showed up, did what they had to do, and who stayed later, right? Maybe who left right on time. So of course, tracking check-in, tracking checkout is also going to be incredibly important. As well as to provide on-site support, right? Being able to recognize who's here, who may I need to support in this given situation. And then afterwards, right? Tracking your data. I always say it, I probably will say it again in today's call, clean data is happy data, right? So being able to track down the line, which of our volunteers served during this opportunity, which volunteers maybe signed up, but didn't actually check in, right? Being able to run those types of queries will be incredibly useful when it's time to send those follow-up communications and when it's time to segment our contacts, or segment our volunteers based on who served during what. Okay, jumping back over to give effect. I'm in our email rules side tab right here. All right, email rules, these simply represent the email notifications folks receive when they complete a front-facing action through your system, right? So I donate, I'm going to receive an email rule thanking me for my donation. I sign up to volunteer, I'm going to receive an email rule saying, right, confirming that I've signed up for whichever shift. Specifically, the email rules, right, the email notifications associated with volunteer actions, those are going to be found right under the volunteer jobs email rules, right? Of course, sign up email rules, those correspond with the email notifications folks receive when they sign up for your opportunities, right? But I want to bring our attention over to the scheduled email rules. These are really nice, right? Because when we add a new scheduled email rule, specifically a scheduled volunteer jobs email rule, we're able to select the job, right? Select which opportunity, which specific opportunity we want this email to be sent out for. And then we're able to schedule this email in relation to whichever job we select, right? So maybe I select my one-on-one teaching job, right? I want this email to go out one day before the shift, right? I could program this email so that everyone that signed up for this job, regardless of the shift that they've signed up for, will automatically receive this email, right? And whatever verbiage I include within this email. We could also program these to go out after the fact. Oh, if I could click. There we go, right? To go out after the fact, right? So if I set this up, right, if I configure the email rule this way, one day after every single one of my one-on-one teaching shifts, every single volunteer will receive this email right after the fact. It's completely scheduled. And then what's even cool about the email rules that are scheduled for after a specific opportunity, we're able to pick and choose, right, whether we want all of the volunteers who signed up to receive the email or only folks who checked in, right? Again, emphasizing that importance on checking in, right, and tracking check-in and checkout times. Moving on really briefly, we're back in our volunteer section, right? When it comes to querying volunteers and segmenting volunteers after the fact, right, based on who served what, right, who served what opportunity. Actually, I'm going to jump back over to my query over here, right, because I did already run a query in the volunteer section of my CRM, right? And right now I'm looking at all of my volunteers that served one of my one-on-one teaching shifts, right? Regardless of the shift, as long as someone served within this job, they're going to be prompted within this query. So here are all 15 of those volunteers, right? Maybe I have another teaching opportunity that I want to reach out to these folks about. All I need to do now that my query, right? I already ran my query, I already ran my report. I'll scroll to the bottom of the page. I can either send an email, I can either email this list, or I can SMS this list directly through GiveEffect. Okay, so in doing this, in selecting, let's just say I select email this list, right? I would be sending a new email to all 15 of the contacts prompted within this query, right? And in doing that, I'll be able to specify, right, whatever information and personalize that email however I'd like based on this specific information. Okay, so being able to not only segment relevant contacts using a query, using a report, but also being able to craft and generate communications directly off of that query, incredibly useful functionality available within GiveEffect in order to ensure that you keep communication lines active with your volunteers. Let me jump over to this tab right here and we'll move on. So implementing your volunteer feedback, right, and evaluating allowing your volunteers to evaluate your systems and processes. So this is another way to show your volunteers that you value them, right, which I somewhat touched on a little bit earlier. But implementing surveys after volunteer opportunities, right, whether these be standalone standalone surveys or tied to their supporter profiles, incredibly useful because this tells you how you're doing, right? If you can make your volunteer processes better, if you could tighten things up, right? Or maybe, what's not broken doesn't need to be fixed, right? Maybe things are going smoothly and you just want folks to be able to voice that, right? To get that confirmation. So utilize, right, within GiveEffect, I would recommend utilizing web forms. Generally speaking, you can't go wrong just utilizing a general survey, right? And sending those out, right, either manually or automating it via whichever tools you have available. And then, of course, thanking folks once that feedback is implemented, right? Thanking them for their partnership, thanking them for their service, and thanking them for their role in bettering your volunteer management systems, right? All of those are incredibly important steps. So here is an example of a web form within GiveEffect, right? Again, surveys can be crafted directly within GiveEffect. And what's nice about that is the smart automation components are at play. So whoever completes your survey through GiveEffect, their record, right? Contact, volunteer record, however you want to refer to it, is going to be updated to reflect the data, right, that they submitted through that web form. Okay, so here we have some general questions regarding rankings, right? Allowing folks to just, put a general ranking on their volunteer experience, and then we have some open-ended questions right down here for the second half, right, the latter half. I created a web form for today's webinar. And again, what's nice about forms within GiveEffect is that you could tie a form to your donation checkout, any one of your volunteer jobs, right? Any one of your campaign signups or registration pages, or you could allow that form to live as a standalone web page, right? So from here, I set my form up very similarly, right, to that example in the slide deck. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your experience? How do you feel? How impactful do you feel your service was to our organization? How do you feel, right? How impactful do you feel that service was to our community, right? And then just some, how would you like, volunteer with us again? Is there anything we could have done better? Very straightforward. And then what I would recommend, take this URL and then include it, if I can find the right tab, include it in your scheduled email rule, right? The email rule scheduled to go out after your volunteer opportunity. There's no manual work that needs to be done whatsoever other than just setting this up, right? That initial programming step. So from here, I could go ahead, include that, right? That web form URL. Everyone, right, specifically every volunteer that is already checked in, or excuse me, every volunteer that has checked in for their 101 teaching shift will receive this form, right, the link to this form after, right, one day after their opportunity, okay? And then the final piece here, a thank you, right? Being able to thank your volunteers for their feedback as it's implemented, right? Of course, within GiveEffect, we could either craft an email campaign, right? Thanking folks for their feedback, or we could craft a traditional letter mail correspondence thanking them for that feedback. Jumping back over into GiveEffect, as you could see right here, I am in our mail template editor, and I am very easily able to both create my mail template directly within GiveEffect. I'm able to personalize it using any one of our available replacement variables. Going even further, I could personalize it using our volunteer summary replacement variables, right? And then from here, I could go ahead and generate this mail template for any one of my volunteers directly from the CRM. All right, so not only fielding that feedback, but also thanking folks in real time for that feedback is going to be imperative. Okay, and then last, certainly not least, right, turning our volunteers into donors. So again, clean data is happy data. Starting with an organized database is going to be key here. Volunteer data, right, allowing that to live in conjunction with all of your fundraising, donor data, stewardship efforts, right? That's going to be key. So ultimately what I'm saying there, right, is having a database as all-encompassing, as robust as possible so that all of this data lives in one store is going to be incredibly important. Involve volunteers in your fundraising efforts, right? Of course, volunteers are going to be incredibly important, right? For helping you man your galas, any other fundraising events that you have, maybe your auctions, right? So involving your volunteers in those events, having them volunteer for those events, exposing them to those events, right? It could give them some FOMO, right? Oh, maybe, I love working this event, this gala, but I kind of want to be one of the ones that's, identified towards the end of the night, right? As one of the special sponsors, right? Just giving them that exposure to your fundraising practices and your initiatives could be a great way to segue them to the donor track, and then making giving easy as possible, right? Of course, having as many channels available for giving as you possibly can, right, while keeping it all organized, absolutely increases volunteers' chances for potentially becoming a donor down the line. Okay. As far as takeaways go, right, I won't spend too much time on takeaways, but the main focus for today's session, right, is even, regardless of the size of your organization, whether you have 50 employees, whether you have 5 employees, right, utilize volunteers in order to pick up some of that, the brunt of that work that a volunteer could easily pick up, right, so that your team could be more so responsible for the activities in this, responsible for keeping the lights on, for raising money, for stewarding relationships, right? So ultimately, volunteers, again, speaking from experience as a former volunteer manager, incredibly important for every organization, okay? Thank you so much. That concludes our part 3 for our mini webinar series. Again, please feel free to join us on Wednesday, the 28th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, to join us for a demo, right? So again, I know I kind of spoke very broadly, regarding Give Effect right through the course of this webinar series, please, 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 I absolutely do encourage you to join that demo if you are interested in getting a deeper dive into Give Effect, learning more about what this software does, maybe even learning more about our support. Okay, questions, time for questions. We already have a few in the chat. Let me go ahead and read through these. So first question, we utilize volunteer hours to match federal grant funding. On our dashboard, you saw a grant tracking tab. Is that for utilizing volunteer hours or actual grant tracking? That is a great question. That grant tracking module you saw in our CRM, if I can find it, this is for actual grant tracking. So within Give Effect, users are able to track grants directly through the system. You'll see each of these subsections. You are able to push a grant record through the different stages of, the different substages of the application process. And then what's really neat about grants is that we can contextualize a grant using some different data available within Give Effect. So I'm able to add interactions, tasks, or even notes, directly within any grant record. So that what you see there is 100% a fully fleshed out grant management system, no relation to volunteers. Okay, moving on. We have volunteers in Puerto Rico and in New York and New Jersey. Is there a way to filter those out from each other? And there absolutely is, right? So as far as there's probably 17 different ways that we can filter them out from one another, right? I'm going to jump over to the volunteer section of our system, right? The easiest way, just looking at zip code, right? If we want to query all of our contacts that have, I'm just going to use my zip code, right? All of the contacts contained within a certain zip code, we can. Maybe we want contacts, right? I know New York, New Jersey, right? The tri-state area, there's a trillion different zip codes down there, right? So what we could do is we can also build advanced search filters on top of each other to capture as many volunteers, right? In New York, New Jersey, or Puerto Rico, or whatever region you're looking for as possible. Okay, great question. Just very quickly on the advanced search function, everything within Give Effect is queryable via an advanced search. Everything, address data, volunteer data, contact data, donation data, you name it. All right. So the data that's stored within your Give Effect system will actually be useful, right? It's not like you'll just store it to store it. You could actually query and report on all of that information. Okay. Got another one. So let me see. Can this platform handle grant reporting from different grants? I believe so. I believe so. Now, I am not, I don't have a ton of experience as a grant manager or submitting grant applications, but you are able to, my mouse wants to click on it. You are absolutely able to query, report on different grants, again, using that advanced search filter. Of course, if you have any specific reporting practices, I would have to get a little more information regarding your specific queries, your specific reports, but absolutely do have this capability available here as well. Cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Excellent. Not used to the Q&A function. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. Please join us on February the 28th for our group demo, our live Give Effect group demo. Really looking forward to seeing you there, and happy Valentine's Day. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you all so much.